Good afternoon. This is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about Arion, Lord of Atlantis, issues 25 through 29. And these are kind of a point in the series, in my opinion, in which things are starting to kind of return to form, as it were, because for several issues, there was kind of a dip in quality. A big part of it was because there was an over-reliance on Arion's arch nemesis, the sorcerer Garn, who also happens to be Arion's estranged brother. But that particular storyline was finally wrapped up in issue 24, in which Arion and Garn had battled it out in the Dark World, and Arion had used the last of the sorcery he was able to be provided with from his father, Kalkoha, and he used that sorcery to essentially drown Garn in the Dark World, thus, ending his threat to Atlantis for the foreseeable future, if not forever. But where issue 25 picks up, Arion finds himself just kind of lost in the Dark World and trying to find a way out, and he finds himself confronting all sorts of various beasties, such as this lovely chap on the cover here, and he's finding himself in an odd position in a sense that while he's enjoying the fact that he's able to vent his pent up anger and frustration at the trauma and chaos that's been unfolding in his life, he realizes that he is essentially acting as an intruder in this realm, and he's while he is acting in self-defense, and when he's fighting these monsters off, he is essentially killing off creatures that happen to live in this realm. It's not like he's defending his realm, and so there's a sort of bit of a contradiction there. It's I thought that was kind of interesting, but in the meantime, though, he comes across a couple of other people who are lost in this realm, and they've been there for a long time apparently, and they come from different races in this Atlantean world, and they're on the run from these monsters that basically go after people who are lost in the Dark World or at the edges of it, and they're all trying to find Arion and his newfound companions, as they're all trying to find this nexus point, which is supposedly the way out of this ongoing maze that they found themselves in. And so Arion eventually does find it when he essentially shows mercy to an enemy that he had conquered, and once that happens, he finds himself transported to the nexus that they were looking for in the first place, but it's just him. His companions, the creatures from other races of the Atlantean world, they're still trapped in this point where they're having to fight for their lives. But because Arion showed compassion and mercy, he finds himself transported to a nexus point, and he finds someone else there, someone who's been there a really long time, and this elderly individual tells him that the only way one can be free is if they kill whoever's been left to guard the nexus. And unfortunately, that this old guy was the one who was the last person to be appointed to guard the nexus, because he killed the person who was before him. And so but Arion's asking, so if you kill me, are you going to be free? And so the guy says yes. And so two of them fight it out, but then Arion decides to go ahead and offer up his life for this guy's freedom, because he sees that this guy has been here for a long time, and I mean he's obviously been driven mad, and so he's thinking, hey, at least with my passing, someone's life may be put right, and so he lets the guy kill him, and but then that's when the forces behind the Nexus, they speak up, and they actually say that both Arion and the old guy have earned their way out, because on one hand, the rules were followed, in that a life was taken at this Nexus point, and so the victor is given the way out. But on the other hand, though, Arion, because he willingly gave up his life, he demonstrated compassion, which the entities behind this Nexus point were unfamiliar with. And once they've seen that, and they see that Arion at this point was coming from a place of noble intentions, and was basically putting his money where his mouth was, they decide to give Arion and the old guy safe passage out of this Nexus point, to where they both go to their mutual destinations. And so it was at this point they say their farewells to one another and wish each other luck, and Arion finds himself transported back to Atlantis, which is where this story comes into play. And so while he doesn't know how long he's been gone, and at the edges of the dark world, it turns out in the real world he's been gone for several weeks, if not months. And he comes back to find that Atlantis has been changed, because while some citizens of Atlantis still hail him as a savior, his closest companions have a different view on him, if they're there at all. Mara, hates Arion, because she rightfully, blames him in part for what happened to Wyynde's people, who were utterly wiped out, with the exception of 2 or 3 survivors, including Wyynde. And also, Wyynde, due to the accumulated tragedy of losing his people, as well as his wife, who, while she wasn't killed, she was turned into a monster, and left him, because she couldn't handle the fact that she was no longer human. Basically, Wynn's life has just been shattered. His family ties, the people that he was rebuilding his his familial connections with have been totally eradicated, due to Garn's sorcery, but also because Arion was the one who came to Garn's people in the first place. And at that point, Arion had been housing Garn within his own body, because he couldn't bear to kill him the first time around, once he found out that the two of them were brothers. And so because Arion withheld that information, and came to Garn's people at such a point that he was so spiritually and mentally weak, that it was easy for Garn to essentially come out of Arion's body and take over. Garn's people were just wiped out, and then Garn, in turn, to add insult to injury, basically manipulated all of Atlantis to turn against Arion, and Wyynde himself nearly killed Arion in a gladiator arena, while Garn joyfully watched. And so all this stuff has just added up to a point where Wyynde has just become catatonic, and he's just sitting there staring into space. And Mara, who had developed something of a crush on Wyynde, she is furious with Arion for his part in Wynnde's current condition. And so, as for Lady Chian, she's gone on, kind of a, she's basically just run away from the kingdom, because she believes that Arion, her friend and lover, has been slain, and so and the fact that Garn had also turned her as well as all of Atlantis against Arion, made her even more mortified, especially when Garn manipulated her into basically having an affair with him. Granted, it was against her will, but at the same time she wasn't herself. She was going along with what Garn was wanting her to do, but deep down though she wasn't wanting to do it. So the fact that she was a puppet of Garn along with everyone else, she just couldn't bear the thought of one, facing Arion should he come back, and two, because she believes he's dead, she couldn't bear betraying his memory, so she leaves. And so as for the King of Atlantis, let's see, what was his name? Datula. He's sealed himself off from everyone in the palace. He refused to speak to anyone. He refused to see anyone because, Garn, manipulated him as well into turning against Arion, whom he saw as, the son he never had and who had done so much for Atlantis. But, because of his weakness, Garn just, came in and took over. And he also realizes that he's been lacking in other areas even before Garn, took him over. And so Arion comes in to find everything changed, and either some of his friends aren't there, or some of his other friends refuse to talk to him or see him or anything. And then to add to all that, there's a cult that's been building itself up in Atlantis over time, led by this lady here, the Abbess. And she and this cult are wanting to resurrect this demon lord who was basically a rival to one of the Atlantean deities who had basically shepherded humanity in the through the Dark Ages. And that's like a long story in and of itself, but this cult has been amassing over time, and once Arion disappeared, they were thinking, hey, green light, we can step things up. We don't have to be so much in the background and shadows as we used to be. But then once Arion comes back from the dark world, or I should say the fringes of the dark world, they realize, okay, we still want to do this, but we have to step things up. And so they end up summoning this demon and this guy on the cover here. And in the process, Arion is seemingly enslaved to the Abbess. And she claims that while the majority of humanity will be either eradicated by this demon lord or enslaved entirely into, say, mutated inhuman forms, she claims that some will retain their humanity for the purposes of being his servants, and others will be in turn I guess servants of the servants as well, and she's wanting Arion to serve as her love slave, as it were. And so in the meantime, while Arion is seemingly enslaved to the Abbess, and Wyynde is catatonic, and Chian is away from the city of Atlantis, Mera tries to help out the city guards against this demon once he begins his attack. And it turns out that she's actually able to hurt the demon, whereas everyone else, and their weapons weren't able to do diddly squat. And she's able to hurt the demon when she uses her changeling abilities, which seem to be triggered by near-death situations that she's going through. She turns into this horned monster that is able to wound this demon lord, which surprises them both because she doesn't have control over her abilities at this point, and she doesn't know what she's going to turn into whenever it happens. And this demon lord, on one hand, he was impressed with her bravery, when she was just fighting him with a bow and arrow. But then once she turns into this monster, it surprises the demon lord, and he's trying to figure out, what have I gotten my hands on here? And then when she actually wounds him with the horn on her head, because she's like this sort of a cross between like a Pegasus and a dragon at this point, but she's able to wound the creature with the horn on her head. And it's at this point that Arion comes to assist her, because it turns out that he wasn't quite as enthralled of the abyss as he was letting on. In fact, he has enough magical capabilities to create a lifelike illusion, which he's demonstrated in other issues as well. But she's convinced that she's with him, and in the meantime, he's breaking away to summon the shade of his father with one of the crystal shards that are required, for this purpose. And so his father recognizes that, or I should say, this father's shade recognizes the threat that this demon poses to Atlantis, and gives Arion the power that he needs to defeat or banish the demon. But he warns him that the times in which you are able to summon me grow increasingly scarce, because the crystal shards are becoming less and less and less. And so he just warns him, you're going to have to find some way to regain your powers eventually, that doesn't, in ways that don't involve me, but in the meantime, I'm here for you, my son. And so Arion comes to Mara's aid, and though she doesn't want anything to do with him at this point, she realizes that she needs his help. And so Arion is able to essentially banish this demon lord to, I guess, its own version of hell, but away from the mortal plane. And so and that's when Mara basically just gives Arion what for. It's like, I didn't need your help, or I didn't want your help. And so at this point in time, a good portion of that also occurs in this issue as well, 27. And as you can see on the cover here, things kind of take a step up, because Lady Chian gets her own solo story as a backup feature in issues 27 and 28. And I really while the main stories thus far in these issues, namely with this cult trying to resurrect the demon lord, or I should say resurrecting the demon lord and then being defeated, I mean, that story's kind of been there, done that. I did like how you saw how the passage of time has changed things in Atlantis, and not everything is well off, and basically the people of Atlantis aren't able to just shrug off having been controlled by Garn. And Arion, he realizes that he can't just keep going back and forth to the crystal shards that summon his father, because one, eventually they're going to run out, and two, he can't just keep running to daddy every time he needs help. He needs to regain his powers, which were significantly depleted several issues ago. And so that's where issue 28 here, Arion, he's looking through the library of Atlantis, or of his sanctum, and trying to find anything within the realm of magic that would help him. And he actually does find something, and he summons this entity that basically weaves these threads of fate and magic that are connected to all things. And he basically tricks this entity into giving him a portion of his powers. I mean, not enough to where, he's the sorcerer he used to be, but to where he's not going to have to rely on, the shade of Kalkuha for some time. But in the process, though, this entity, it's like the two of them have to have this sort of battle of wits with one another, because it's like if they sign a contract, you got to make sure to read the fine print. And the entity actually tricks Arion in this regard. But this little kid on the cover here, a citizen of Atlantis who was trying to become a mage himself, actually ends up helping Arion, and he provides a timely distraction against this Atlantean deity, in which Arion is able to turn the tables, and and the entity goes back to where it came from, and after having been forced to give Arion the powers that were promised within the pact. And so and the kid, he realizes that Arion has his limitations, but at the same time, he does have connections to other forces. But just because you have the connections to other forces, it doesn't mean you can just walk invincibly among them. Like magic, it's something that you have to be careful with. And so while all this is happening, while Arion's just regained his powers, Lady Chian, in her story, her backup story, while she's going off by herself to be away from Atlantis, she comes across this little girl who is being forced into a religious ritual by her people. Basically, she's being forced into the equivalent of a nunnery, wherein she's shut off from the outside world, but to contemplate the faith of her people, and I guess, but obviously she's not wanting to do that, and she had run away from her tribe, and her tribe were sending people after her to either bring her back or to kill her. And so Lady Chian ends up defending this girl, and she ends up fighting the girl's own father, who is the ruler of the tribe. And he's so dead set committed to his tribe's faith that he's willing to have his daughter killed if she won't willingly go off into this religious seclusion. And so Chian and the father end up fighting each other, and she defeats him. But in the process, though, she's reliving a conflict that she had with her own father a long time ago when she was a child. And it turns out that her father, while she and her father initially got along, her father had gotten into some kind of debt with the ruling bodies of their people. And there was like a contract that was created in which his family has to give up a child from their line every certain number of years. And as it happened, that when this time came around, Lady Chian was the one who was sent off against her will with these other people. And so the last memory she had of her father is, the guy on his knees, crying, saying, "I'm sorry," blah, blah, blah. But she remembers that he never came to try and find her. And so while she's with these other people, she learns to, defend herself. She learns to fight. And, basically, she gradually becomes the woman that we know and love in the series, the woman who eventually became the captain of the guard of Atlantis. And before that she was a mercenary once she escaped from the people that had taken her. But she was a skilled warrior in battle and loyal to those who she served under. But she eventually found her way to the city of Atlantis and pledged her loyalty to Datula, the king. And eventually, once Arion came into the picture, the two of them ended up, becoming friends and lovers after that. But in the meantime, though, all this stuff, it's like she's this experience, with helping this little girl has kind of brought all this back. And so she defeats the girl's father in combat, and she has the opportunity to kill him, and which would basically, yeah, she'd win and the father would die with honor according to his people. But instead, she spares him and, once basically leaves him in humiliation. But she takes his daughter with her, to bring to Atlantis, where she'll, hopefully have a better life, one where she isn't forced into something she doesn't want to do. And the father is just left with, the memory that, he's, lost by his own doing his daughter. And so, anyway, though, everything kind of converges, both Arion's, search for magic, as well, or I should say, more magic, and Lady Chian's journey and return to Atlantis all kind of converge in this issue, 29, in which features the return of the jackal demi-human, Sinet, who I've actually come to like as a villain, way more than Garn. But Sinet, though, it turns out, since Arion and his friends defeated Sinet and his comrades in issue 12, Sinet has been in an Atlantean jail cell. And at this point, when Lady Chian returns to Atlantis, and Arion has just, gained more in power, it's at this point that Sinet is a part of a work detail to help rebuild the city, and also, or to do away with certain things that Garn had constructed while he was briefly the ruler of the city. And so Sinet uses his opportunity to escape, but he forms a group of, a gang. It turns out he's been building connections and friendships with his fellow prisoners, and at the appointed time when they had an opportunity, they would break out together, and this ends up happening. And so while part of the gang is causing havoc by hijacking hovercraft and attacking parts of Atlantis, Arion ends up trying to find Sinet himself, because he knows that this guy is more than likely going to be the ringleader. And Sinet has actually made it into where King Datula has shut himself off from the people here. But he basically does like he does on the cover, and threatens Datula's life. But he says, I'll spare him if you let me kill you. And naturally, Arion is able to get Datula out of this particular jam, and he also is able to fight Sinet. But Sinet, while he wasn't expecting Arion to have recovered a significant portion of his magical abilities, he wasn't totally unprepared, because he has one of his comrades was an aspiring sorcerer himself, and he had him kind of waiting on standby just in case Arion proved to be too much of a threat for him to handle. And so while Sinet escapes after having been unable to kidnap or kill the king, this aspiring sorcerer that he's recruited from the prison to help him against Arion willingly stands his ground against Arion, knowing that he'll either be killed or recaptured if he survives going up against Arion. But he feels that he owes Sinet his life and his loyalty for having got him out of the prison in the first place. So this guy, this aspiring sorcerer, nearly manages to kill Arion. And it turns out that Arion, while he has more magical abilities at this point, he has only just recently regained them, and so he's not quite as efficient as he once was, and which is why he was nearly curb stopped by by this aspiring sorcerer. And so Arion ends up, using more physical means to defeat the guy, namely by using one of his swords and impaling the guy's hand to a wall. And it was at this point that the Atlantean guard and Lady Chian are able to defeat the prisoners and end their uprising. Although, unfortunately, Wyynde, who is still catatonic, is seemingly killed when one of the hovercraft that was commandeered by the prisoners ends up crashing the very same building where Wyynde was housed. And so, while this rebellion is put down, and the loss of life is not as much as it could have been, there are still a lot of bad things that happened. Sinet has escaped, and as far as they can tell, and could very well strike again. And King Tachula is still crippled by psychological despair due to not having been able to be able to help his people properly when Garn had basically mind controlled everyone. But this situation has made him even worse off, because it's like he's being physically confronted by Sinet, and Sinet at this point for him was basically kind of an embodiment of his failures coming to claim him. And Arion, in the meantime, while he has helped to save Atlantis again, he realizes that he needs to thoroughly retrain himself to use magic, but also he needs to find more magic, as opposed to just relying on the snippets that he's able to gain from obscure corners of a library. But unfortunately, he loses the friendship of Mara, who, as I said, had fallen in love with Wyynde, even though it was a bit of a one-sided crush. But the two of them had become really close as friends. And so, when the fact that she was blaming Arion for what happened to Wynnde's people, I mean, that's bad enough. I mean, because it's something that she's not, wrong on. But then at the same time, though, when Wyynde is seemingly killed by an errant hovercraft, she blames Arion for Wynnde's death, because Sinet was an enemy that Arion and his friends had an opportunity to deal with a little more permanently, but because they spared him and basically just had him put in a jail cell in Atlantis, Sinet had the opportunity to strike again. And so this time one of their own was killed, seemingly, because one of the last panels on the last page is a picture of Wyynde just kind of rising up from the rubble, looking up at what was left of the building that he was housed in. So I don't know if this means he's no longer catatonic, or it just means he survived it, but he's still catatonic. But anyway, so this particular little arc ends here, with Arion making the decision at the end here to find another means of attaining magic on a more permanent level. But also he himself is haunted because he realizes that the relationships with his friends has been damaged by his own actions in a way. So I actually, even though this set of issues I've reviewed is only 5 issues, I actually enjoyed them a good deal more than the set of issues I reviewed previously, partially because they weren't weighed down by a villain who the creative team was overly relying on, and also just because, I mean, they were able to, I guess, focus more on the emotional impact of Garn's actions against Atlantis. And you see that Arion, even though he's the protagonist of the series, Arion is not the only one to be affected by Garn's actions. I mean, the whole of Atlantis has been, whether that be physical, in the sense that Atlantis' enemies have attacked the city, or they're more vulnerable to, say, a secret cult, making itself known, or even Sinet being able to stage a prisoner uprising, and then of course you have Wyynde being rendered catatonic because of the sheer emotional devastation he's felt due to Garn's actions, and Arion's in part. So I did like how you had like all this emotional baggage that was making itself known here, because the previous issues that I reviewed, that I did in my last review, they didn't really deal with, I guess, the emotional fallout of everything that happened. I mean, yeah, Wynn's people were wiped out, but there really wasn't a whole lot of focus being given to the characters to deal with it. Whereas here in these 5 issues, you find out that while in the weeks that Arion was at the fringes of the Dark World, Wyynde just gave up, and after all that's happened to him, I mean, you can hardly blame the poor guy. And the same thing with Mara. While Arion wasn't completely responsible for Wynn's predicament, he was partially responsible. And so, her, hating Arion at this point and, wanting him out of, their lives, I mean, it's kind of understandable. And I also liked how, she's given a little more development in a couple of the issues here, in which, you see her stepping up as a person, in the sense that she's trying to take care of Wyynde and his catatonia, and then you also see her putting her life on the line to help the guard of Atlantis deal with this resurrected demon lord. And and I appreciate the fact that we still don't quite know what makes her powers work, and that her powers are very unpredictable. But, and to the sense that she's not the only one caught off guard by when she's able to do something with them, but her enemies are as well. Case in point, when she ends up wounding the demon lord, when in her mutated form, when she turns into another monster. So I like the fact that there's still some mystery with her character, namely with how her powers work, but we actually see more of her, development as a person. And she's, a character that I think has gradually improved over the course of the series. And I think this element of realism, in the sense that, because of her love for Wyynde, her, anger at Arion, basically comes across as, something that gives her character a lot more believability. Also, I really liked how Lady Chian was given a focus in the backup stories. Because she's been a mainstay of the series since its beginning, and she's a really good character. She's a strong-willed woman who is very capable in what she does. She's a very capable, captain of the guard. She's a great fighter, and she's a loyal friend and companion to Arion. And she also, has the backs of her friends as well. She's a very good character, but we always knew that there was a story with her, and we never got it until now in these backup stories. So when she has the flashbacks, and I actually really appreciated seeing that, because it was a good story. It gave a lot of insight into her character, and like both in the present day segments of the stories as well as the flashbacks. And I liked her relationship with the young girl that she ends up saving, and hopefully this isn't the last we see of the two of them interacting with one another, because they had a very distinct bond in the backup story. than when she saves this girl and brings her to Atlantis for a better life. Also, the other thing I appreciated about the backup stories was that series co-creator and original artist Jan Duursema came back and illustrated the backup stories for Lady Chian, and so the new artist Kara Sherman Terreno, she did the artwork for the rest of the issues that were I guess outside of the backup stories, and she's gradually kind of growing on me. But at the same time, when I saw Jan Duursema's artwork in the backup stories, I was like, I mean, the nude artist is good, but Duursema is always going to be the signature Arion artist for me. And I'm really glad that she did this backup story for Lady Chian, because Duursema is someone who has always been good at drawing both men and women, and to give Lady Chian a story to shine, it's kind of a good thing for writer Paul Kupperberg, but it's especially a good thing for Jan Duursema as an artist to see this female character be given her day in the sun, so to speak, and she looks great. And also, I liked in this last story, I did like seeing Sinet, because, as I mentioned, he's a villain that I came to like a lot more than Garn. And one of the reasons I liked Sinet, was because while he was definitely a villain, he does have kind of a there's a certain thing about him to where there's almost a sense of honor when it comes to his character, albeit from an evil standpoint. Because he was always loyal to his men, and he hated the fact that Garn was treating him and his men like 10th rate citizens, while Garn was basically in his towers in comfort. Sinet and his men were fighting battles for him and probably getting killed. And so whenever he shows up in a story with Arion, it's always intriguing, because Arion is almost always at a different point in his life, on an emotional level. And, Sinet, he stays the same in the sense of him being the same type of character who, has his own agenda, but at the same time isn't going to just, cut and run unless, it really calls for it. And granted, he did cut and run at the end of the story, though, but, because he had a backup plan with this, rogue mage, you get through the dialogue that, the loyalty that, the prisoners have to Sinet is genuine loyalty. And it's not loyalty out of fear, as, say, it would be with Garn. And so, when he cut and run at the end of the story, after having been unable to kidnap or kill the king, or to kill Arion, when the rogue mage is talking, you get from the dialogue that he's willingly staying behind to cover Sinet's escape, because Sinet was a friend to him and was the one who gave him his freedom in the first place. And so I did find that an interesting thing about that particular character, about Sinet. And just that while he was a villain, he commanded genuine loyalty, from those who served with him, compared to, say, an evil sorcerer, like Garn, or some of the other characters that we've seen in the series so far. Or heck, the demon lord that this, cult, resurrected, that the abbess was leading. And when you compare, the demon lord, who basically wants to, do away with all, humanity, with the exception of a few slaves, versus, say, Sinet, who, while he does want to, basically rise above his station in life, he's not, trying to, wipe out all life on the planet or anything like that. He's just basically trying to carve up, an empire for him and his friends, his comrades, those who've served with him. And so I found that, kind of an interesting contrast, between the two villains. But also, while there wasn't a whole lot of focus given to King Totula, I appreciate the fact that, much like, how you see the fallout with, Wyynde and Mara and other characters of Atlantis, due to Arion's actions, you also, see the fallout, affecting King Totula, because, I mean, the guy's, 100 and something years old at this point, but he also, he's become, more susceptible to outside influence, as we've seen a few times. But when Garn's basically turned him and everyone else in Atlantis against Arion, he realizes that he's in little to no condition to rule, and so he's just in despair. And if you've interacted with someone like this in real life who has they've gotten to a point where they just can't function anymore, but they used to be able to, but at the same time they're being confronted with reality. And if you've had moments like that, it can be a very impactful bit of reading, when you come across this development with King Totula's character within these particular issues. And so I really enjoyed this particular set of issues, and we're getting closer to the end of the series. And the one downside is just that while I agree with Arion's decision to go on a quest to gain a more permanent source of magic than what he's had so far, and I applaud the creative team at the time for doing this, for sure, because Arion is a sorcerer. He needs magic. I really think that they should have done something like this. Like they announced a 4-part storyline, starting with issue 30, which I'll be covering soon. It's called the Magic Odyssey. It was issues 30 through 33. And, that's going to cover Arion's attempt to gain a more permanent source of magic. But while I definitely think the creative team's going in the right direction here, I do wish that they had done something like this much earlier on in the series. Like, they should have done this, say, I would say, like, after issue 15. After, Arion, gained the, sword hilt, that was in Garn's citadel, and basically housed Garn's essence, which kind of compounded with the essence that was already in Arion himself, and once all that stuff happened in that story, I think Arion should have been like, okay, we've got to do something about this, and basically they should have had something happen to where Arion did a journey like they're talking about is going to be happening, and maybe then Wynnde's people would have been wiped out by Arion's own negligence. And so that's the only downside, just in my opinion. But overall, though, this is definitely a step up compared to the previous issues that I covered in my last review. So I'm going to go ahead and give Arion, Lord of Atlantis, issues 25 through 29 4 out of 5 stars. I mean, not great, but definitely a step up. And I appreciate the added realism of the characters' interactions and their thoughts on everything that's been going on lately. So thank you for taking the time to check out my review. And if y'all like what you see here, please feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. And I hope to get some feedback from y'all. And y'all have a good day. Take care. Bye.